Okay, so Parashat Nasso. Parashat Nasso is the longest parasha in the Torah, 176 Pesukim. Parashat Nasso, however, does not have too many subjects in it. There's one main event, which is the Nisi'im bringing their donations to inaugurate the Mishkan in the beginning of Nisan. And otherwise, there are two major sets of halachot in this parasha. One is the laws of Sotah, the wayward woman, and the other is the laws of Nazir, the Nazareth. That's what we want to focus on this morning. The Nazir essentially is a form of neder, it's a form of vow. And someone, as you know, who makes the vow of Nazir, it's just a more extreme form of Nazir, neder rather, in that if you engage in that vow, you're going to find yourself facing a handful of mizvot aseh and mizvot lo ta'aseh. In other words, you might be in for more than you bargained for, but it is a neder. As you know, if you decide to take that vow upon yourself, you have three restrictions. One is the grape and anything associated with the grape, whether it's the physical grape itself, the pulp, the peel, the pits, whether it's and mainly if it's the extract of the grape, meaning wine or grape juice that comes from it. Secondly, you have a restriction of ta'ad lo ya'bor al rosho, of not cutting the head of your head or facial hair and letting it grow. And thirdly, from tum'at met, you have as a kohen would, a restriction of being in contact with or the vicinity of a deceased, and that includes the main, essential, and close relatives. All that is restricted if you take upon yourself neder of Nazir. We know historically in Tanakh, there were a handful of different famous Tanakh characters who were in the status of Nazir. Ironically, the one that we think of probably first and foremost, Shimshon, was not a real Nazir. Shimshon never took any neder upon himself. It was decreed upon him by the angel before his birth. And therefore, Shimshon was not limited to all the limitations of Nazir. And he was allowed to be metameh met, to encounter and be in contact with the deceased. And you know that Shimshon killed many of the enemy for that very reason. He was allowed to. And so there's something called, therefore, a Nazir Shimshon. If someone would take that upon himself, then he would only have two of the three restrictions. Otherwise, we find that Shemuel Hanabi and Absalom, the son of David HaMelech, were Nazirim, but they were what's called Nazir Olam, which is a lifetime Nazir, which means that if a person, without specifying, vows to be a Nazir, 30-day minimum period. If he specifies longer than 30 days, it's that specification. If he says, I'll be a Nazir forever, then he's called Nazir Olam, and that's what Absalom and Shemuel were. The only difference between them and a regular Nazir is that every 12 months, a Nazir Olam, an eternal, so to speak, Nazir, can cut his hair. Otherwise, they're the same. But going back to the way we started, Nazir is a neder, it's a vow. How do we look at vows? How does halakha look at vows? We know that the poskim, the Rambam included, speaks of a vow as by and large being something not so positive, as something that one should avoid for the most part because it's easy to violate. It restricts sometimes for no good purpose, and we're not a restrictive religion of abstention. Of course, if a person has a neder that has to do with something regarding kedusha, he has to keep that neder. Most other type of nedarim, of vows, one should try to legally get out of that neder by consulting a rabbinic authority. The only exception to all of this is that a neder that the Rambam says that is done, he calls it lechonen de'otav v'letaken ma'asav, to focus himself and improve his ways. If he finds himself weak in certain areas of Torah observance, and that is the purpose of the short-term neder, so then that is praiseworthy and should go through with that neder. So the question is, in light of our view in general of nedarim, what is our view? What is the Torah's view to the neder of the Nazir? Is it praiseworthy? Is it suggested? Is it a holy venture? It is something that is possibly just an error and a folly that one enters into, and then the Torah has to guide him through until he is extricated from it, but really it was not advisable. How does the Torah look upon the Nazir? And the truth is, there's a couple of Pesukim that give us some insight, and those few Pesukim, which is sort of the Torah opining on the Nazir, giving us, Kadosh Baruch Hu, of course, giving us his opinion, seem to conflict. The Parashat Nazir, which is in Perek Vav, it goes for 21 Pesukim, opens up with a little description of Nazir, and then closes with a comment, and those two comments seem to conflict each other. So, focus is very simple. I didn't bring up any Pesukim to share with you on the screen this week, because it's just a couple of phrases. One phrase is, Ish or Isha, a man or a woman, ki yafli lindor, neder nazir, lahazir lahashem. That is a description. Basically, it's Torah is introducing us this topic by saying if a man or a woman should take upon themselves the vow of Nazir. However, the terminology uses ki yafli lindor. We'll look at what that word means. A neder of a Nazir, lahazir, to become a Nazir to God. Later on, there's another phrase that seems to be positive, and that is, he shouldn't defile himself to the deceased, ki nezer elohav al rosho, because he has a crown of God on his head. And at the end, as we said, there's possibly a conflicting sentiment towards the Nazir. So let's go back to this introduction, and let's talk about what is this phraseology referring to, ki yafli lindor. Well, the root of the word is pere. Yafli could mean a few different things in the Torah. As we see in one context, the Torah says, ki yipaleh mimecha davar. And that refers to something being concealed from you, separate from you. Ki yafli lindor, should you make a separating vow. And what does that refer to? It refers to the fact that this person is separating himself from a whole lot. He's separating himself and allowing his hair and facial hair to grow long from any type of material pursuit, from any type of worldly involvements, from any care of his facial and physical appearance, from any possibility of possible arrogance because he is so caught up in his looks, and basically distancing himself from the, you can call it the material and very artificial pursuits and desires that a person engages in this world. He is also separating himself from wine, and that, by extension, means that he is refraining from situations that could become dangerous, that could become sinful. And, as they say in the outside world, party on. Alcohol is often used and ingested in the context of having a good time, of getting involved in wrong things, allowing you to lose yourself. And, frankly, sometimes a sinful engagement and behavior. This person is separating himself from all of this. It seems that he is sanctifying himself, in other words. And on top of that, because he wants to maintain a happy and positive perspective and relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, no deceased involvements here, nothing that might bring upon depression and sadness. It would almost seem like this person is an angel. So that's kiyafli in terms of the separation. It also, the root word pele means pele, wonder, something of amazement, something that just shocks us and takes us aback. And indeed, this person is jolting us with his choice of vow and his voluntary mode of behavior. The natural tendency of man is to engage in this physical world, is to be material, is to pursue desires, is to be drawn into trends. And this person is abstaining from all that, he's avoiding all that, he's protecting himself, and he is acting very different from the way an average and expected human being would act. It's a pele, wonder, and it's a shock. And therefore the Torah introduces him by saying, Ki yafli lindor. Should he separate and shock us into this type of vow in which he engages? And it says that this is lahazir lahashem. There's no doubt. He has no other motivations. He has no ulterior motives besides dedicating himself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's pure devotion to God. From that perspective, this is a very positive description of the Nazir. And in fact, the Ibn Ezra points out that when Torah says that Kinezer Elohav al Rosho, that he has a crown of God on his head, that in essence, this person is making himself into a king, in that your average human being, including the Jewish nation, are human beings, and we are subservient to other factors in this world. We're subservient to our desires, to our tendencies, to trends in the world. We're subject to the material possessions around us. They draw us, they motivate us. We are basically bound to physicality, and in a certain sense, we are slaves. We are slaves to this physical, material world of us around us. And in that sense, we don't make free will decisions. Our decisions are subservient to our body and its tendencies, to our mind and desire, and to that which it's drawn. And therefore, we are not masters of ourselves. Says the Ibn Ezra, that when a person makes a neder of Nazir, put a crown on him. He is king, for he has overcome his desires, he has mastered his tendencies, he is not subject to anything in the world, he is not enslaved and encumbered by the material possessions, draws, and desires of this world. He just doesn't care. He is a king. No one rules him because he rules himself. He's completely disciplined. Wow. In essence, this first term of the Torah, based on that view, and really the support of all the commentaries, is describing someone who's almost angelic, at least temporarily, in that period of time. It would seem to me, and I would venture to say, maybe you'll join me in this sentiment, that every person, and every Jew should be a Nazir Olam, should be a Nazir for the rest of his life. Because what could be better than fulfilling the will of God by separating yourself from the materialism of the world and crowning yourself with the crown of God and being a master of everything and just engaging in the opposite, the antithesis of physicality. And yet we don't do that. We do it for a temporary time. We give ourselves a dose of Nazir. And why is that? Sefer HaChanuch has a profound view on what the objective of the Nazir really is. And he says as follows: we are physical and we can't avoid that. There's no question about it. We have to pay mind to our body or our body will wither away. He likens the body to a house. A person must maintain his house or else it will dilapidate. He has to maintain the landscaping, he has to do repairs, and he has to make sure the house is in order. What the Nazir does, the beauty of this vow is that it strikes an incredible balance. And the balance is, how close can I get to clinging to God? How much can I distance myself from the nonsense of this world, which gets us nowhere, which has not an internal investment, which eventually at the end of 120 ends up we know where, and only other virtuous, noble engagements, godly involvements will be eternal. How do I engage in that proper mode of behavior without allowing the house, the body, to dilapidate and ignoring it? Says the Torah in the explanation of the Sefer HaChanuch, perfect plan, it's the Nazir. Because the Nazir, temporarily for most people, allows himself not to abstain from all physical involvement. The person eats, he's not fasting. We're not in a religion of abstention. We don't flog ourselves and whip ourselves and beat ourselves. We don't, sleep in the cold and refrain from food and drink. We don't do that. We're not going to allow the house to dilapidate. We'll maintain the body. But we will refrain from is that which draws us away from God, and abstention from those aspects of life will allow us to draw to God. Become that angelic king, if you will, described by the Torah and the opinion of the Ibn Ezra, that king of his desires and that master of himself, while maintaining the body, that perfect balance of not ignoring your physicality while not being drawn by it and allowing yourself to be drawn to God. What a balance. Says the Sefer HaChinuch that by doing this person essentially, and I'll tell you his words in English, he says by doing so, a person is mitkayem kavanat habiri'ah. He's fulfilling the objective of existence, of human existence in this world. He struck the balance. He discovered the recipe of how man should conduct himself, how a Jew should lead his life in this world. Sounds fabulous. So let's do a Nazir, a Neder Nazir, at least once a year, for a month out of the year. Maybe we should. We don't do it anymore. There are korbanot attached to it. But with all that praiseworthy behavior and that wonderful positive description by the Torah of what this vow, what the objective and goal of this vow is, and what the positive consequences of it are, the end of the entire discussion tells us that this Nazir, among other sacrifices, must bring a korban hatat, which is a sin offering. And at the end it says, ma'asher hata al hanafesh. From that which he was sinful to his body. Or simply put, because of that he sinned. He sinned, we described to you an angel, and someone who was realistically striking the perfect balance in life and fulfilling the objective of existence. What did he sin? There are two opinions in the Gemara. And one of them says maybe he wasn't careful because there's so many laws involved. He is so likely to err in one of them and therefore sin. But the other opinion says because si'er asmo min hayayin, because he abstained, because he made things difficult for himself. And the Ramban explains that what that means is as follows. This person proved something to himself. When I want to do it, I can. When I want to elevate myself to a higher status, at least for a temporary period of time, I can do it. When I want to sanctify myself, when I want to draw closer to God, it's within my wherewithal and ability to do it. I showed myself how far I can go. This is the post-Yom Kippur syndrome. I have vowed, I have committed, I understand my obligation, and I feel great. We leave Knis with a wonderful smile on our face in Yom Kippur, not just because we can eat, because we prove to ourselves how spiritual we can be, and what kind of relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu we can foster. And says that the Ramban, that once you have demonstrated that you can elevate yourself to such heights, haram to leave it, haram to go back to physicality. You have to it's probably reality that you can't leave yourself in the Nazir status all your life. But I want to pinch you in the end, just to tell you that isn't it a shame that we have to live sometimes the lives of pursuit that we do? I'm going to give you a sin offering to go, Mashir Hata al Hanafesh, because you have to go back to regular existence. And that is a shame. But at least the Nazir reminds us, if not just temporarily, that we're capable of anything we set our minds to. And that too hard, too long, too heavy, too expensive, too confusing is all rationalizing to ourselves and never true and sincere and honest to ourselves. Nazir proves you can do it. The Nazir is the recipe to draw close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Everyone in a different way, shape, and form demonstrate our ability to become a conceptual Nazir at certain points in our life. We must all reflect back to those moments and say haram that we can't always be that, but at least allow those wonderful moments of elevation and spirituality in our lives to always give us a spark of inspiration and know that we're always capable of reaching heights in our relationship to our Creator. Baruch Adonai Olam.